So it's just a matter of including people from marginalized communities inside the places where you actually make decisions.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you very much for attending this panel at 10 a.m. in the morning on a Sunday. Secondly, I know it's hot, but to be honest, we have always the topics I'm more charged in because I'm the Diversity Inclusion Officer of the European Film Academy and your moderator today, so it's a hot topic anyway, so I think we go with the season, which is good. Yeah, today we have a panel on intersectionality and authentic storytelling, and I will just, because we also have a different type of settings for interpretation. So we have sign language interpretation, we have interpretation in French and Italian as well. So, and then we have also live captioning for Amazon. So all kind of, so we will all speak in a very fairly pace as agreed. And if you have also later maybe some questions, or if there's a room, some questions, so I would ask you also to speak in that matter. So thanks again also for this whole setup, and thank you very much. This is a tradition at Locarno to have an inclusive panel. We had it also last year, and this, I'm happy to be part of this again this year. So very briefly, I will just introduce this nice canvas of panelists we have on this nice canvas sofa setting, what they set up this year. And very briefly, so we have basically on the very far end, Emerson Gu, film critic. Welcome. Maybe an applause would be nice. Melanie Iredale, exhibitionist, so distributor, right? Exhibitor, sorry, yeah. Helios B, producer, welcome. And to my left, Lina Sualem, filmmaker, but also part of the jury of Cineastia Presente, welcome. Yeah, so let's start, really dive into the discussion on intersectionality and authentic storytelling. And I think I would just really have the first question basically to everybody. How do you define authentic storytelling in the context of intersectionality in cinema? So maybe it's who wants to contribute. It's the open question first, and then, but because it's a very, very important issue now. Melanie?
Hi. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this, Fatih, and the team at Locarno. We'll dig into this so much more, but very briefly, for me, authentic storytelling is enabling filmmakers to make the films that they want to make, tell the stories that they want to tell in the way that they want to tell them. And from a point of some lived experience, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Somebody else, maybe, and you?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So I think for me, intersectionality, to be honest, it's kind of a buzzword these days. When people use it, they use it in a rhetorical way, but without material change behind it. To me, it means ensuring that there's redistribution of resources, that there are essentially support systems available for filmmakers that may come from minority backgrounds or underrepresented backgrounds, especially at events like this, which can be intimidating to sort of present one's film or present one's perspective. And in some cases, I think it should also mean divesting from systems, not necessarily inclusion, but also divesting from systems that aren't committed to intersectionality and which have extractive practices, which utilize minority perspectives to sort of boost their social justice credibility, but don't really go beyond a sort of superficial understanding of how to use diversity.
Thank you. Yeah, so maybe I would just go through some specific questions for each of you, because just to also maybe also understand and also give the audience a chance to understand your point of view. Maybe I would start here with Lena on my left. So obviously intersectionality or identity plays also a big role in your films, but also you're an emerging filmmaker right now. So how would you basically, how do you navigate your filmmaking also when it comes to your different identities?
I think for me, as Emerson was saying, it's not really the words that come to my mind. I don't think diversity, intersectionality, because these are words that are used by others to describe us, as if we couldn't exist in our complex way in this world and we had to be in a certain box so that we could exist in their kind of like quotas. And for me, what was important in my filmmaking and what I realized also is that what is not allowed for us is complexity, actually. And so this is something that is very important for me to allow to exist, because our voices are not as heard, are not as considered as universal. And this is also a word that is really problematic for me, because when they say universal to you, they think white. And so when they say your story is not universal, it's because it's not a white story. So I had a lot of issues with the way that my projects were described or put into boxes. And so I had to fight a lot with myself also to try to find a new language. And I think as a filmmaker, it's really important, because filmmaking is also recreating a new language. And so I think I really transformed that to allow myself to not be defined by their terms, and really try to claim that we recreate a new language so that we're not perceived through the exterior's words and perceptions. And so as a woman and as a woman from an Arab background in Europe, it's not only in my filmmaking that I have to do that, it's also in my day-to-day. So for me, it's very political. Anything we bring to the world is political, because if we don't tell our stories with our own words, we don't exist in the general story, in the public space, because they would only define us with their stigma.
Thank you. Helios, I would come to you next as a producer and a representative of the transgender community. So what are your take on this? What are your steps you already did? But also when it comes to on-screen representation, but also behind-screen representation, especially on producer side, but also script writing and so on. So what we have to do and what maybe you already did in this field.
So I just want to say I don't represent like the trans community. I'm here with my own, experience as a white person who navigates the world from, a very masculine presentation. But I would say, I think, Emerson, you made some amazing points about distribution of resources. Let's say, just to talk about like what makes within this conversation of authentic storytelling. So let's talk about like a trans film. What makes a film trans? Is it the director that is trans? Is it the story? Is it having cast and crew? People from that community. When I talk about like a film being trans or not, I don't look about just like, again, this hierarchical system, above the line, below the line. If people that you can see on screen are trans, is that trans? I don't think so. I think it's all about like what you're doing with the resources that you got. I think it's also about maybe like transgressing the genre. So when you see people playing with hybrid genre being like docu features, I think that's also, doing a trans story. And then I also think in the context of intersectionality, especially right now, I think it's also important to bring in, in the context of, let's say, Palestine. For us, it was super important to boycott certain festivals, to boycott certain platforms, to boycott certain spaces that we were in that invited us because, they wanted a trans person to come and talk. But for us, it didn't feel right to be there because, as a lot of people have said, like, we are only going to be free if everyone is, because trans Palestinian people do exist. And this applies to other, intersectionality. So, yeah, that was one point I wanted to make.
Thank you. Melanie, you are part or director of Reclaim the Frame. It's an organization. So what did you do in order to have also intersectional voices and filmmakers be more represented in the industry? What initiatives did you do? So I would like to also give the chance to introduce here your organization again.
Yeah, thank you. So Reclaim the Frame is a charity based in the UK. Started out 20 years ago as a women's film festival called Bird's Eye View, and has evolved over the years to become not so much a festival, more year-round, not just in London, but UK-wide, and increasingly doing more international initiatives. And not only championing women's cinema, but films by filmmakers of all marginalised genders. And we do that through training programs, through advocacy that's particularly kind of research-based advocacy. So we track, for example, in the UK, not how many films are getting commissioned that or made that are by women, trans or non-binary filmmakers, but that are getting seen. So, how many are getting picked up for distribution in the UK? And taking a kind of intersectional, approach to that data in terms of, for example, how many black women, for example, how many black women's films, for example, are getting picked up for distribution in the UK. And then our main work is as an exhibitor. So our work is trying to make a kind of intervention, if you like, in how many films reach UK screens at point of distribution. So influencing distributors to so-called take risk on which is a term I have an issue with, because it's all about who they consider to be a sort of sure bet or safe pair of hands and who they don't, enabling those films to get seen more widely around the UK, more screens, and amplifying those films, because it tends to be, even if we reach, so-called 50-50 in terms of gender parity, and even if, things were more equal for filmmakers of colour or, genderqueer filmmakers, so on, which they are not, we still have an issue of budget. And, we cannot be equal until budget, talking about distribution of resources, until budgets are also more equal. And so the fact that marginalised filmmakers tend to be making films with smaller budgets obviously impacts on the marketing budget. The marketing budget impacts on its potential for opening weekend box office. And so those films are seen to do less well because they haven't had the resource and investment to help them get further. Also, the system works whereby the pressure for opening weekend box office really benefits the kinds of films that have the kind of big marketing budgets to be able to do sort of big, poster on the tube and on the sides of buses kind of marketing campaigns in advance, whereas the kinds of films that we support, because they tend to be more the films that are made by marginalised gender filmmakers, tend to be those ones that rely on word of mouth and community building. And the fact is that they need longer, but so much pressure is put in the opening weekend. So part of our work is around supporting that, but also supporting those films to continue to be circulated for longer. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we can then move to the next also important area in the film industry, which is also the perspective of critics. And Emerson, in your world of being a film critic, how does the conversation on, as you also mentioned rightly so, the buzzword intersectionally evolved, but also from your perspective, like how would you basically see the new discussion when it comes to supporting films from underrepresented voices?
Right. Well, first of all, when I define myself as a deaf film writer or a deaf film critic, I also want to be clear that I'm also figuring out what that means myself, because what does it even mean to write about cinema from a deaf perspective? One of the things that I think about all the time is that at the beginning of cinema, when cinema was essentially invented as an art form, it was silent. And so at least in the United States, this meant that deaf and hearing audiences were actually on an equal footing almost when it came to exhibition of films, distribution of films. And actually there were deaf players in the silent cinema. There were deaf extras, deaf cast, deaf crew. And with the advent of sound, that essentially completely changed. They were completely excluded from the sound cinema. And it completely changed the dynamic overnight. And with sound cinema, it didn't just affect deaf people. It also affected, many other languages around the world. There was a standardization of representation of language in film. And so in a way, I think about it from the perspective of linguistic imperialism almost, and exclusion of certain voices with film technologies. And so I think for me as a critic, it's not so much about pointing to this or that representation, but theorizing how film form itself, how the ways film has structurally evolved throughout history has excluded people. I think it's very important to think about things from that sort of historical perspective. And I think we can support filmmakers, minority or underrepresented filmmakers, by doing this kind of work to uncover their presence in the history of cinema, not just the presence, but also thinking about where were black and brown people in the history of cinema. Even if they didn't necessarily have a leading role, how can we bring that to light so that we can use that as an example for people in the present and for people to understand the genealogy, the lineage that they come from? That's one thing that I think critics can do.
Thank you very much. I want to also raise the issue because we obviously are aware that diversity, inclusion, intersectionality, LGBTQI+ are right now also buzzwords which certain filmmakers use who are not from these communities, but they, I think, in my opinion, a bit provocatively said, also use these stories in order to be invited now on festivals, and then it's always like seen by especially established artistic directors, oh, it's so courageous, so we should invite these persons. So how do you basically, what take do you have on this, and how we can make sure that actually really the community voices get more their voices represented in this, when it comes also to festivals and programming?
Maybe here I'll probably talk about the work I do, just to respond to this. So I run a network for trans people working in the film industry. That includes pre-production, production, distribution, even PR. And we just provide jobs to them. We're not an agency. I'll never take any commission, and I want to be quite clear with that, because I am working against a system that just takes. And when we receive, let's say, opportunities or jobs, it's super important for us to greenlight the project first. So let's say someone is looking for a makeup artist, or even, let's say a runner, because, they want us, but just, on the running the floor, never making decisions. I always ask to see the scripts. And sometimes there are conversations where I said, you know what, this script is really dodgy. I'm not going to work with you. or sometimes, if I see that there's an effort for them to make the work, I say, well, you know what, you're going to have to spend a bit more money and hire not a consultant, but a writer, and work on that character again. Or sometimes it's also about like giving space. So we had recently someone that was looking for, again, a runner. And I said, I'll only give you a runner or a makeup artist if you actually hire an associate director that will work with you, that will make decision with you, that will hire with you other people to then, make this story a bit more authentic. And so when you see a lot of filmmakers out trying to tap in, what they want is the name, they want the price, but they don't want to, again, like there was a conversation that I had with Melanie like a couple of days ago. They want to be included in the conversation, but never exclude themselves to include other people. So it's always about taking, but never about like, let me sit back, give them money, and make a story, and then maybe this director can say, I was actually a co-director with a trans person. Or again, we can talk about other intersectionalities here. So yeah, I think sometimes seeing people trying to jump in on all these current trend leads to also very annoying stories, because they got the platform. So like you were talking about distribution, they already got, spaces in cinemas and venues and festivals, and everyone is going to be like, this is an amazing story about this, and it's like, well, not really. Or like, this has been done before, but you guys didn't pick it up.
Thank you very much. Melanie, you want to say something?
Yeah, I would just add to that I think credits are really important. And I think, I guess when we're watching and considering a film, that's kind of speaking to a story about a certain community, we are looking at the credits, and I think that kind of sharing of credits and, I guess as a kind of organization that's, come from a kind of feminist background, I guess, that kind of more acceptance of a kind of collective way of making is really interesting to us. So I guess, if the filmmaker themselves is not from that community, I'm always kind of looking for like how they've kind of shared the shaping of the story and the credits with those who have. And the other thing is just that I think if a film hasn't, if the film hasn't come from somebody kind of within the community of which it's telling the story, like I just think you can tell. I think, you can, I guess, if you watch something and you feel like it's kind of speaking to, I guess, so for example, as a queer woman, I am sick and tired of watching films by, cis, het, straight, usually white men about queer women or lesbian experience, and I don't even need to know who's made it. I can watch it. It feels uncomfortable. It doesn't feel genuine. I don't see myself or the people that I know in it. Like it's, I just think you can tell. And so, I just think, you can't get away with it.
And also the fact that certain communities are obviously now reacting very vulnerable when it comes to certain type of representation on screen. And I don't know, Lina, do you pay attention to this, or also like, because you're also part of a group?
There's, for me, two things. Sorry. With several women filmmakers from the Arab world and diaspora, I'm non-binary, we created a collective called Rawiyat, which means storyteller in Arabic, because we kind of were crossing each other in festivals and always had these informal conversations about the problems and challenges that we were facing, and we realized how much it was kind of a pattern. First of all, we came across a number, 50% of women that do a first film don't do a second film because they're not paid as much as men for the first film, so it's hard for them to sustain themselves, so they have to take on another job, and once they work, it's hard to stop working to start a film. And so there's, first of all, this inequality, and today people would say, but there is, now like they would take a film because you're a woman and not because it's a good film and you have funds for women. But with all the discrimination that has gone by for centuries. I think it's only fair to have a bit of help, and it's we shouldn't say it's easy now. It's not at all. There's still salary inequality, discrimination, and so this is very important. And also, for example, me being based in France, we have a very good system of grants that is public and national, but in which you can encounter also issues. For example, now there is parity for projects based on gender, but when you talk about installing quotas for directors from Arab or African descent, this is a scandal. And at the time, installing quotas for women was a scandal, and now they are so happy to say that they have parity. So I think it's a constant fight. Things that seem unnatural to them or a scandal will become at a point what they will use to show that they are open and representative. So I think it's important for us to always talk about these issues publicly and not informally. That is why we decided to become a group and public and have these conversations publicly, because we tend to be scared to criticize the system while we benefit from it and navigate in it. And for me, it comes back to what it means to being an artist. For me, being an artist is questioning the system. Once you stop doing that, you're not doing art anymore. This is my opinion. I'm a bit radical for that.
Yeah, maybe the last question before I open to the public. Obviously, I work for an awards institution. Emerson, you're a critic, so we basically see the films which are getting funded. So I want to go more to the discussion of funds because at the end, these are the key decision makers, especially in Europe, but we also live in times where in certain countries, like recently, for example, Slovakia, decided not to fund any more LGBTQIA plus stories in the funding scheme. So, meaning, do we need also to look for alternative ways of funding right now? Because certain decision makers in these funds, I mean, they clearly still need a lot of training when it comes to diversity, inclusion, or sensibility, or also an exchange in the structure. Or do we basically really still knocking on not the heaven's door, but and try basically to really our luck? Or what are your take on this because when we also hear these stories in other countries?
As part of Locarno Pro, the conference a couple of days ago, there was a lot of talk about the kind of funding and systems, and a real call for a kind of what was sort of written up in Variety as a changing of the guard. And just, for example, in the UK, and I realise this is, doesn't translate everywhere, but there's been a quite significant change, I would say, in a couple of ways. One is that those who work in the film fund at the British Film Institute, who are in the sort of decision-making, gatekeeping roles of what gets funded and commissioned, have made a move to they can't be in post for more than sort of 3 to 5 years. So I think, Helios, you sort of mentioned that, if in order to include, sometimes you have to exclude yourself. And so I think there's a kind of understanding that there needs to be a rotation in order for there to be continued movement in those top roles. And the other thing is that they have looked at their slate and realised that, most of the films that they're funding are dramas. And, that's great because they tend to be lower budget in terms of giving, first-time filmmakers the kind of opportunity to tell their story. But I think we also need to accept that not everybody wants to make a drama. Some people want to make genre films, and this particularly affects marginalised filmmakers who tend to be given the lowest budgets. and as Lena said, tend to be in the position where like they're least likely to make a second film, or if you're a woman filmmaker, it might take 80% of them 10 years to make their second film. And if they want to move into something that's anything other than kind of low budget drama or documentary, which is also better for marginalized filmmakers just because, again, it's lower budget. So again, it's not parity in terms of pay. And marketing potential and so on. So yeah, they've put in place some initiatives to, which Helios is a part of, so we can talk about, which is, about kind of better considering the kinds of films that they are enabling particularly marginalized filmmakers to make. Rather than giving them sort of, the lowest amount they can get away with to make a debut drama and then go no further. That's just a UK perspective, but...
No, but like it's a very good point, and we did receive some of the funds to make, basically, we got a fund to curate a lab for 10 filmmakers. We'll invite 10 filmmakers to, make a feature film, and it can be everything but drama. Because we do want to see, trans horror, trans comedy, trans musical, maybe like, butch femme noir, whatever that is. But we had to be quite clever with our funds. So I think that goes back to my now second point. If you do get funds, be clever with it. They said you can't really pay writers with that fund. So what we said was, in order for us to include like working class writers in our lab, we were like, what if we make them work by attending masterclasses and pay them as people that are working by coming to our masterclasses? And that allow us to actually give them quite a lot. 80% of the fund is going to pay these writers to make their film by attending masterclasses, residencies, classes that are very quiet, not a lot is happening, but we're paying them to write. So I think going back to fund, if you have a fund, try and be clever with it and try and find a way to, use the system to abuse it.
Thank you very much. Maybe just the last round before we open to the questions now. What you are basically demanding from the industry when it comes to the topic of intersectional authentic storytelling? I mean, just really one liner or two lines, like what you think is still relevant, which you would give also to the audience, but also to the industry watching.
For me, it's very clear. They just have to hire the people that actually are the ones knowing the groundwork and being part of these communities, instead of hiring someone that is not, that will choose for them. So it's just a matter of including people from marginalized communities inside the places where you actually make decisions.
Yeah, but also maybe also in terms of audience, because this is also a panel for the audience.
I would say trust us. Trust that we can make stories or like have a successful box office or, great films out there.
I just want to add about audience, that is also something that is shaped by the dominant, because they are the ones who tell you what will work, what won't work, and they are the ones who decide who is the audience that goes to cinema and who is not. For example, for me, when I did my first film, everyone was saying it will never come out in theater, it will not interest anyone. It's an Algerian story about old Algerian, my grandparents. It's not universal because they're not white. And the thing is, like, by saying that, they despised half of the population in France, for example, that has a link to Algeria. And so when I had to fight for it to come out, and when it came out, they were like surprised and shocked that there was so many people in the theaters, because for them, these people are not cinema goers. So that's why, for me, talking about audience through the prism of the language that we have today, through the prism of the language of the institutions, makes no sense. And that's why I go back to what you were saying, which is trust us, and we actually have to trust our instincts on that, because we know what surrounds us in society.
Thank you. Melon?
Yeah, I mean, I just completely agree with everything that Lena and Helios have just said. And yeah, we just add that there absolutely is, I guess from experience, from what we do at Reclaim the Frame, there absolutely is an audience for the kinds of films that struggle to get picked up because there are people in certain roles who think that that audience doesn't exist just because that audience isn't them. And it just takes more work. It takes grassroots outreach. It takes word of mouth. It takes community building. It takes building trust. But they are there and they do show up. But we need to make the cinema spaces safe and accessible for them to be able to do so. That's another thing.
I think there are 2 points I want to make. One is about film production and the other is about film festivals. So in terms of what I would demand on the production side, first of all, most of the narratives about deaf people are directed and written by hearing people. That's not really inclusion, because if we're only being represented in front of the camera but not behind the camera, what that leads to is hearing directors making films, for example, that have sign language in them, but they don't understand the grammar of sign language, because film grammar is constructed from an oral perspective, from the perspective of filming oral languages. They don't understand how to film sign language in a way that is legible for people. And so we really need, in order to develop a deaf film grammar, to theorize that we need deaf people behind the camera as directors, writers, and producers. And then the second point that I want to make about film festivals is that we need way more infrastructure at film festivals to support deaf people, subtitles, captions, all of these things like that. And one of the great initiatives that is taking place in the US with the International Documentary Association, they have a little side organization called Forward Doc, which is an organization that advocates for accessibility of deaf and disabled filmmakers. And one of the tools that they have created is a film event accessibility scorecard. Now, this is not a checklist, but it's a kind of document of things that film festivals should do to improve their accessibility practices. And not only their accessibility practices, to think about how film festival workers, the labor of film festival workers who are filming this panel right now can be valued and can be appreciated. Because I think so often those are like some of the most exploited people at film festivals, the people that do the labor of running the festival. And this film event accessibility scorecard is something that I think a lot of festivals should take up and incorporate into the practices when they reflect on how a festival went, or when they prepare to put on a festival. Think about how these accessibility these points of accessibility can be incorporated into the planning from the beginning of the preparation of the festival, not at the end as an afterthought, which accessibility so often is. It's just an afterthought. It's something you tack on to a film, you tack on to an event, the accessibility materials. We don't want that to happen. So those are the things that I would demand.
Thank you very much. I would now open to the public. We have not much room for questions, time, but I see 2, 3. Maybe we can gather questions, 2, 3, and be really, really short, and introduce maybe also yourself briefly. The microphone is, I think, coming up here in the front. Yeah. She will translate. No, the translator needs a microphone.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Colgo l'occasione, sono una persona sorda e quindi colgo questa occasione di raccontarvi le mie esperienze. Sono anni che volevo venire a questo festival del film, al Festival di Locarno, e ho sempre rinunciato proprio perché non è mai stato accessibile. Poco tempo fa è stato creato questo gruppo sull'accessibilità che sta un po' girando nel Festival di Locarno per vedere a che punto siamo con l'accessibilità, e quindi io ho colto l'occasione al volo per farne parte. Avrei una domanda, vorrei sapere come far sì che sceneggiatori sordi, attori sordi, registi sordi, oppure persone sorde che fanno parte dell'industria del cinema, come possono arrivare a questo festival? Perché a me sembra che manchi accessibilità anche per loro. e sono e continuano a essere discriminate, quindi sono veramente tante in tutta Europa. Nella comunità sorda conosciamo parecchi artisti sordi attivi nell'ambito della cinematografia che però non arrivano a questi festival, tipo il Festival di Locarno. Come fanno ad arrivare qui? Come potrebbero fare?
All right, someone has to repeat that in English.
So yeah, maybe I can. Yes, yes. So I will repeat. So the question was how, because the deaf community has such a big people in as writers, filmmakers. So how can they really access film festivals? How can they come, and how can we make them also welcoming at settings like film festivals?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. I think that, first of all, like you said, there's a big subject of deaf film festivals that don't really interact with film festivals for hearing people. I really think that there should be more cross-pollination between deaf film festivals and festivals like this. And I think the problem is that deaf film festivals are sort of looked down upon. They're sort of seen as lesser than. The quality of the films might not necessarily be as good as at festivals like this. But I think the way to rectify that is to increase, the intersections between, the disability community and communities like this, not in the sense of tokenism, like, oh, we're just going to bring one person here and that's it, but in the sense of, like, they have the Critics Academy, the Filmmakers Academy, the Industry Academy. How can we bring in people from the deaf filmmaking community into these spaces? I think that's very, very important, and they need to be encouraged to apply for such initiatives, because a lot of times people feel like they can't apply for these things. They won't have the accommodations required to participate in events like these, or they won't have the financial resources available. They need to be encouraged to apply, and they need to be supported when they apply for these initiatives.
Thank you. Another question.
There was a question here.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Kopiso, and I come from Botswana. If you allow me two questions, I don't know. But I think the first one is there was mention of looking at and assessing the types of people that you guys work with, the kind of scripts that they write, the kind of, how can I say, basically like who they are and what kind of story they're trying to put forth, right? And in both examples that were given, there was a lot of, in certain instances you can tell. In certain instances, if it feels uncomfortable, then it's something that you guys are like, no, maybe not, right? But what I've noticed, and I don't know if, and this is where my question comes in, is for a lot of films and the method of how to figure out what should be funded and what should be given attention. There is a lot of conversations around feelings and around this is what makes me uncomfortable, but I feel that it creates a bias because then now we are looking at it in the scope of your background and what you feel is uncomfortable and comfortable for you. And I haven't heard a lot of, okay, we looked at 1,000 films and we looked at a panel of different people and we looked at what the factors that make the majority of the people uncomfortable or the majority of issues that tackle, like maybe in short, a systematic approach to it so that you don't become the bias you're trying to eliminate. So I wanted to know, how do you ensure that in making sure that you are bringing the right stories to the forefront, you don't become the very bias that you're trying to, try to bring down. And then, if allowed, my second thing is Sub-Saharan Africa. Nollywood is huge, South Africa is huge as it relates to cinema, and I just wanted to know, over and above that, there is also a thing where Africa is trending. You get Afro beats, you get fashion, food that is coming to the forefront as well in filmmaking, and I just wanted to know how you guys approach and work with that. People from sub-Saharan Africa and the music that's coming up and everything that's coming up in a way that you also don't want to you don't want to how can I say it? You don't want to negate the type of stories that are coming out, and maybe because it's not something that you can relate to, you don't want to dim it in any way. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Thank you so much for your question. So that was an amazing point, the bias. And I think that was something that I did learn over time. When a script comes in and it's not something that I relate to, I transfer it to people that I know are from that background. So when I say we, I mean, I'm talking on behalf of my network. I'm not talking about me and my decision making. And that is super important. For instance, if we do have some stories about, let's say, sex workers or about people from a specific, let's say, a very specific disability, then we try and send them the script and we say, what do you think? And again, this is maybe just one or two experiences and they will come up and say, well, no. So maybe 2 people out of 1,000 people in this world will say no, and then it's a no when it could have actually been a yes. So I know that there's a lot of complexities within that. And when it comes to the point that you made about sub-Saharan Africa, we try to work with literally everyone. Like recently we did get another fund and we decided to work with a trans person from South Africa. So I know it's a different region, but what we thought of doing was giving UK money to South Africa, and we kind of pulled out and we're like, do what you want to do with it. And again, it's just about platforming that without, again, it's like about being clever with the funding, and then exclude yourself and then see what comes out of it. But what we can do is just give you the resources. And I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's all about the biases is such a complex, I think, conversation. Because even if you take 2 opinions that are saying, again, no, I don't think this project should be platformed, with, again, listening to 2 people out of, but for us, that's better than nothing. Or, again, me giving my opinion, which doesn't matter in this context because I'm not from that background.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, if I can just add kind of same answer. At Reclaim the Frame, we consider films as a collective. So there are a number of eyes that watch each of the films that we are considering, and therefore a kind of range of perspectives and backgrounds, and also biases, as individuals, absolutely. And, I think it helps to do the work to know what they are, but sort of likewise, well, I guess, 2 things. One is we're sort of having conversations about these films in the round as a team, and as a quite as a kind of intersectionally quite diverse team, and and the what was I going to say? My second point was and then also just a kind of acceptance that sort of acknowledging where you think you are and aren't the audience for something. Sometimes my team members want to champion a film. I'm less sure, but I'm also might just accept that this is not this is not for me. I am not the audience for this. For example, it skews younger or something. In which case, it's sort of I wouldn't stand in the way of that. So I think collective decision making would be our answer.
Thank you. We can only take now one last question. I saw that the lady in the yellow in the second row. But after, please, we just have to also, because our time is running. So please.
Good morning, everyone. What would you advise for a debutant scriptwriter who got stuck stuck in his project because the producers, the filmmakers are not, how to say, doesn't like, want to transform his story. And at the end, so this is actually my case. I have a script, it's already done. By the way, I'm based in Netherlands recently, but I'm from Ukraine partially and from Morocco also. And in Netherlands, basically the producer said that I should transform my story in that way that it would be very interesting and very actual for Netherlands society. For instance, about Moroccan immigrants, because there are a lot of such things, or about Ukraine, war in Ukraine. But I don't want to tell about such stories. I have my own personal story that I want to be heard. And what would you, advise for not only a debutant scriptwriter, but for a person who is not yet in the film industry at all? So just in the beginning. Thank you.
If I may, I think, first of all, you have to say that you don't agree and that you won't do that. You have to be very firm in the way that you are the director and you are the one who is bringing the stories. So you are the one who decides and has the final say on everything. And you have an instinct that you have to follow and trust, and this is what allows you to create. So don't let them make you believe that your instinct is not as valid as an experience or a knowledge, because it's also experience and knowledge. And if it doesn't work out, you have to change producers and try to find people that understand. You cannot sacrifice your story for interests that are not even the right ones, because the producers are thinking, this one, for example, would be thinking in terms of how he or she or they will make money or, attract an audience of the country they live in. So it's their interest, it's not yours. So if you don't find someone that actually believes in your project, it doesn't mean that you cannot listen to what they have to say, because sometimes you have advice or an opinion that is exterior that is important, because we make mistakes and sometimes we go on a path and we realize that, but it's your journey and you're right to go on that path until you want to yourself change or go back. It's a lot of, for us, it's a lot of fighting. And I had this conversation with a male filmmaker yesterday about all the challenges that I faced with my producers along the years. And he was shocked and saying, it's crazy, because for me, when I tell my producer I want that, no one says like, no, you have to do that. Everyone's like, of course. And this is something that we don't know.
Thank you very much. Emerson, you want to say something? Or?
I would say that I'm actually just going to echo Lena's point. You have to insist upon your own perspective. You have to insist upon it. And I think through the process of doing that, you find out who your real friends are, basically. You find out who you can trust. And I think that's so very important, to find the people who you trust enough to go through this ordeal with you that you shouldn't have to go through in the first place, right? And I think once you build up that network, it does get a little bit easier, because I can personally say that it's the filmmakers and the editors and the other writers that are really conscious about accessibility practices that I continue to work with now and in the future. And so I think over time you will build up that network. I think it takes time, but eventually you learn who you can trust.
Thank you very much. I thank you all for the participation. Thank you to the interpreters on stage, but also at the side. Thank you very much. And we are still here, but we just have also to close to release the interpreters. So if you have questions, just come and approach us. And I wish you a very nice sunny Sunday here in Locarno and an enjoyable time. Thank you.